During Christmas dinner, as we sat around the table that had been perfectly set with my grandmother's china and gleaming silverware, surrounded by the warm glow of candles and the scent of pine from the tree we had decorated together just days before, my father stood up slowly and said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. We never considered her family. He was looking directly at me when he said it, his voice steady and matter-of-fact, as if he was commenting on the weather or asking someone to pass the salt. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft crackling of the fireplace and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Around that table sat 3 generations of the Patterson family. My grandparents, my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, all the people I had loved and trusted and considered my safe harbor for 26 years of my life. But in that moment, with those 6 devastating words hanging in the air like a death sentence, I realized that I had been living a lie. I wasn't really family. I had never been family. I was something else entirely, something they had tolerated and pretended to love but had never truly accepted. The worst part wasn't just the words themselves, though they cut through me like shards of glass. The worst part was the way everyone else at that table nodded in agreement, the way my mother looked down at her plate without contradiction, the way my siblings continued eating as if nothing earth-shattering had just been announced. They had all known. Every single person in that room had been keeping the secret from me, had been participating in an elaborate charade that made my entire life feel like a cruel joke. But what I did next would expose the truth they had been hiding for decades, and force them to confront the devastating consequences of their deception. The Christmas dinner had started like every other family gathering I could remember from my childhood and young adulthood, with the familiar chaos of 3 generations trying to coordinate schedules, prepare massive amounts of food, and navigate the complex dynamics that come with any large family celebration. I had driven 4 hours from my apartment in the city to be there, had taken precious vacation days from my demanding job at the law firm, had spent weeks shopping for thoughtful gifts for everyone on my carefully maintained list. This was supposed to be our family's Christmas tradition, the annual gathering that brought us all together despite busy lives and geographical distances. My grandmother had spent days preparing her famous recipes, the same dishes she had been making for holiday dinners since before I was born. The dining room table had been extended to its full length to accommodate everyone, covered with her hand-embroidered tablecloth that only came out for special occasions. The Christmas tree in the corner was massive and perfectly decorated, surrounded by carefully wrapped presents that represented hours of thoughtful consideration and significant financial investment from family members who genuinely seemed to care about each other. Everything looked exactly the way Christmas should look in a loving family home, warm and welcoming, and filled with the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people who have known you your entire life. I had been looking forward to this gathering for weeks, especially because I had some exciting news to share about my recent promotion at work and my new relationship with someone I was genuinely excited to introduce to the family eventually. I thought this Christmas would be particularly special, a celebration of how well my life was going and how grateful I was for the foundation of love and support my family had always provided. But even before my father's devastating announcement, there had been subtle signs that something was different about this particular Christmas gathering, warning signals that I had noticed but dismissed as holiday stress or the normal tensions that sometimes arise when large families spend extended time together. Conversations had been stilted and careful, with long pauses that felt loaded with unspoken meaning. People kept exchanging glances that seemed to carry messages I couldn't decode, and several times I had caught family members whispering to each other before falling silent when I approached. My cousin Jennifer, who had always been like a sister to me, seemed unable to make eye contact during our usual catching-up conversation. My Uncle Robert, typically the family jokester who kept everyone laughing throughout dinner, had been unusually quiet and serious. Even my grandmother, the family matriarch who had always made me feel especially loved and cherished, seemed distant and preoccupied in a way that was completely out of character. When I had tried to help with dinner preparation, my mother had politely but firmly shooed me out of the kitchen, claiming they had everything under control, which was unusual because she had always welcomed my assistance during family gatherings. The present exchange that morning had felt awkward and forced, with people seeming to go through the motions of gift-giving without the genuine enthusiasm that had always characterized our family celebrations. I had chalked all of this up to the stress of the holidays, the complexity of coordinating large family gatherings, maybe some family drama or conflict that I hadn't been told about yet. I never could have imagined that the source of the tension was me, that I was the problem everyone was trying to figure out how to address. The truth was, that I had always been different from the rest of my family in ways that I had never fully understood or questioned, differences that I had attributed to natural personality variations that exist in every family. While my siblings all shared similar physical characteristics, the Patterson family's distinctive green eyes, light brown hair, and tall, lean build, I had always been shorter and darker, with brown eyes and hair so black it was almost blue in certain light. My parents had explained this away by talking about recessive genes and distant relatives, family stories about a great-grandmother who had supposedly had similar coloring. While my siblings all seemed to excel naturally at athletics and had similar interests in outdoor activities and sports, I had always been drawn to books, art, and academic pursuits that none of them particularly understood or shared. While they all seemed to inherit the Patterson family's easygoing, extroverted personalities, I had always been more introspective and sensitive, more likely to think deeply about things rather than accept them at face value. These differences had sometimes made me feel like an outsider within my own family, but I had assumed that was normal, that every family had members who didn't quite fit the typical mold. My parents had always insisted that diversity of interests and personalities made families stronger, that my different perspectives and abilities were valuable contributions to our family dynamic. They had supported my academic achievements, celebrated my artistic talents, and seemed proud when I became the first person in our family to graduate from college and pursue a professional career. I had never had any reason to doubt that I belonged, that I was as much a Patterson as anyone else sitting around that Christmas table. But my father's words that night revealed that every assumption I had made about my place in the family had been built on a foundation of lies and deliberate deception that stretched back to my earliest childhood memories. "We never considered her family" wasn't just a cruel statement made in a moment of holiday stress or family conflict. It was a confession, an admission that my entire life had been based on a fundamental deception that everyone in my family had participated in maintaining for over 2 decades. As the shocking silence continued to stretch around that dinner table, my mind began racing through memories and experiences that suddenly took on completely different meanings in light of this revelation. The way conversations sometimes stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The family photos that seemed to show everyone else clustered together naturally, while I always appeared slightly separate or different somehow. The times when relatives would make comments about how lucky I was to be part of such a loving family, as if my presence was some kind of gift or charity rather than a natural right. The way certain family stories always seemed to start from a time just after my earliest memories, as if the family history I knew was incomplete or edited in some way. The adoption papers I had accidentally found in my mother's desk drawer when I was 12 years old. Papers that my parents had explained away as legal documents related to insurance or medical emergencies. Not something I needed to worry about or understand. All of these moments that I had dismissed or rationalized over the years suddenly formed a clear pattern that painted a picture I had been too trusting and too naive to see. The moment of truth came when I finally found my voice and asked the question that would change everything. "What do you mean you never considered me family?" My father looked uncomfortable for the first time since his announcement, shifting in his chair and glancing around the table as if seeking support from the other family members who had apparently been part of this conspiracy all along. My mother finally spoke up, her voice carefully controlled, but lacking the warmth and affection I had always associated with her maternal tone. "We took you in when you were 3 years old," she said, as if this was information I should have already known, as if this was a conversation we had already had many times before. "Your biological mother was my sister Karen, who died in a car accident. We felt it was our duty to raise you, but we always intended for it to be temporary until we could find a more suitable permanent arrangement." The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. I had a biological mother I had never known about, an aunt who had been erased from family history so completely that I had never even heard her name mentioned. My entire childhood had been a temporary arrangement that had simply never been formalized into something else. I wasn't adopted in the legal sense that would have made me a real family member with rights and recognition. I was more like a long-term foster child, someone they had taken in out of obligation rather than love, someone they had always planned to eventually pass off to someone else when it became convenient or appropriate to do so. The devastating details continued to pour out as my family members took turns filling in the gaps of the story I had never been told, painting a picture of my origins that was completely different from everything I had believed about myself and my place in their lives. My biological mother, Karen, had apparently been the black sheep of the family, someone who had made choices and lived a lifestyle that my grandparents and extended family disapproved of strongly. She had been involved with someone they considered unsuitable, had struggled with addiction issues, and had generally been seen as an embarrassment to the Patterson family name and reputation. When she died suddenly, Leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter with no clear father figure or family support system, my parents had stepped in to prevent me from being placed in the foster care system. But their motivation had been more about family obligation and avoiding scandal than about genuine desire to expand their family or provide me with a loving home. They had always intended for the arrangement to be temporary, had spent years looking for alternative placement options that would allow them to fulfill their duty to Karen's memory, while returning their family to its original composition. But years had passed, and no suitable alternatives had materialized, and gradually it had become easier to simply continue the arrangement rather than disrupt what had become a functional, if not ideal, family dynamic. They had never legally adopted me, had never given me their name in any official capacity, and had apparently never stopped thinking of me as a temporary addition to their family, rather than a permanent member with equal status and rights. As this devastating information continued to unfold around that Christmas dinner table, I realized that my entire sense of identity and belonging had been based on a lie that had become so entrenched that even my family seemed to have forgotten it was originally meant to be temporary. The love and support I thought I had received throughout my childhood hadn't been the unconditional parental love I had assumed, but rather the care and responsibility one might show to any child in their custody, regardless of emotional attachment or permanent commitment. My achievements and milestones had been celebrated not because I was their daughter accomplishing great things, but because I was a child in their care who was reflecting well on their parenting abilities and family values. The financial support they had provided for my education hadn't been an investment in their daughter's future, but rather an extension of their obligation to provide appropriate care for a child who had been placed in their custody by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Even my presence at family gatherings and holiday celebrations had apparently been tolerated rather than desired, included out of a sense of duty rather than genuine affection or desire for my company. The realization that I had spent 26 years feeling grateful for love that had never actually existed was almost too devastating to process while sitting in that room surrounded by people who had participated in maintaining this elaborate deception. But the most crushing revelation came when my grandmother, the family member I had always felt closest to and most unconditionally loved by, spoke up to add her perspective to this devastating family confession. "We always hoped you would eventually want to learn about your real family," she said, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact in a way that made clear this was a conversation she had been prepared to have for years. "We kept some of Karen's things for you, thinking that someday you might want to understand where you really came from and what your actual heritage was." She disappeared into another room and returned with a box I had never seen before, filled with photographs, documents, and personal items that told the story of a woman I had never known existed. The photographs showed a woman who looked exactly like me, the same dark hair and brown eyes and facial features that had always made me feel different from the Patterson family. There were letters and journals that revealed a complex, troubled person who had struggled with challenges I could only begin to understand. There were legal documents that showed she had never named a father on my birth certificate, had listed her occupation as unemployed, and had been living in a series of temporary housing situations when she died. This box represented a completely different version of my origins, a story that explained why I had always felt like I didn't quite fit into the Patterson family narrative, but had never understood why. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life, a moment of clarity and rage that burned away years of confusion and self-doubt in a matter of minutes. I stood up from that Christmas dinner table, looked around at all the faces of people I had loved and trusted and considered my family, and told them exactly what I thought of their decades-long deception and the casual way they had just destroyed my entire sense of identity and belonging. I explained that if they had never considered me family, then I would no longer consider them family either, that they had forfeited any right to my love, respect, or presence in their lives by maintaining such a fundamental lie for so many years. I told them that their sense of duty and obligation had been a poor substitute for the genuine love and acceptance I had deserved as a child, and that their failure to be honest with me about my origins had robbed me of the opportunity to make informed decisions about my own identity and relationships. I gathered my coat and purse, left my carefully chosen Christmas gifts on the table where they sat, and walked out of that house knowing that I would never return as the person I had been when I arrived. The last thing I heard as I closed the door behind me was my mother calling after me, asking where I was going to go and what I was going to do, as if they had just realized that their revelation might have consequences they hadn't fully considered. The months that followed my discovery of the truth about my origins were simultaneously the most difficult and most liberating period of my adult life. I spent weeks processing the emotional devastation of learning that my entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies and half-truths, grieving the loss of the family I thought I had while trying to figure out who I actually was without their definition of my worth and place in the world. But I also began the fascinating and empowering process of learning about my real mother, Karen, piecing together the story of her life from the contents of that box and additional research I conducted on my own. I discovered that she had been an artist and a free spirit who had made choices that were unconventional but not necessarily wrong, who had struggled with challenges that were more about mental health and societal pressures than about character flaws or moral failings. I found distant relatives on her side of the family who welcomed me with genuine warmth and excitement, people who shared my interests and perspectives in ways that the Patterson family never had. I learned about my cultural heritage and family history that explained so much about my personality, preferences, and natural abilities that had always seemed inexplicable within the Patterson family context. Today, 5 years after that devastating Christmas dinner revelation, I have built a life and identity that feels authentic and genuine in ways that my previous existence never did. I maintain relationships with several relatives from my biological mother's side of the family, people who knew Karen and can share stories and memories that help me understand where I came from and who I might have become if she had lived. I've established a successful career and personal relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and duty. I've learned to trust my own instincts and perceptions, rather than constantly second-guessing myself when my experiences don't match what others tell me should be true. Most importantly, I've learned that family is something you choose and build rather than something you're simply assigned to by birth or circumstance, and that the people who truly love you will accept and celebrate who you are, rather than trying to make you fit into their predetermined expectations. I have had no contact with the Patterson family since that Christmas dinner, despite several attempts by various family members to reach out and repair our relationship. They seem to believe that their revelation was somehow a gift, that knowing the truth about my origins should make me grateful for the years of care they provided rather than angry about the deception they maintained. They don't seem to understand that the problem wasn't necessarily that I was adopted or taken in by relatives, but that they lied about it for decades and never gave me the opportunity to understand my own story or make informed choices about my relationships and identity. They appear to expect gratitude and forgiveness for what they see as their generosity and sacrifice, without acknowledging the harm caused by their deception or taking responsibility for the emotional damage they inflicted by maintaining such a fundamental lie for so many years. Looking back now, I realize that my father's announcement that Christmas evening, devastating as it was to hear, actually freed me from a lifetime of confusion and self-doubt about why I never quite fit into the family I thought was mine. Learning the truth about my origins was painful, but it also explained so many things that had never made sense before and gave me permission to stop trying to be someone I was never meant to be. The Patterson family's refusal to consider me real family ultimately led me to find my actual family among people who choose to love and accept me exactly as I am. Was my family wrong to hide my true origins for decades and then reveal them so casually? Should they have told me the truth from the beginning? Or was their deception motivated by genuine care for my well-being? Would you have handled it differently if you discovered that your entire identity was based on lies your family had maintained for over 20 years? Sometimes the most loving thing people can do is tell you the truth about who you are, even when that truth is painful, because living authentically is always better than living a lie, no matter how comfortable that lie might seem.